Welcome back to the EMEA CX Breakroom. I'm Kim Johal, and today we're asking a question that pops up quite regular in conversations in the industry. Which new channels and customer entry points actually matter and which are just noise? I'm joined by Lelen Udayan, Head of Customer Experience at Ackermans, one of Southern Africa's largest retailers, who has also led CX at a major African remittance platform and luxury automotive brand. Three very different customer environments that make him one of the most genuinely broad CX practitioners I've spoken to. Hey, Lelen.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for having me here.
And Lauren Potgieter, Infobip's country manager for South Africa, who has spent 26 years in the BPO and CX industry, joining Infobip early this year, and now works with enterprise brands across the region every day. Hey, Lauren.
Thank you, Kim. Looking forward to the session.
We're going to cover the channels and the trends within these channels, which are reshaping CX right now, like RCS, click to WhatsApp, and WhatsApp flows. Also, what's on the horizon and how you build infrastructure that holds all of this together without losing context along the way. So let's get started. When you look at your customer base today, Lelen, Ackermans serves 88% of females aged between 24 to 44, millennial mothers making high-frequency purchasing decisions. Lauren, you're working with enterprise brands across South Africa. Can you both actually see generational differences in channel preferences, or is it more, the concept in practice?
I think the primary differences we see are not necessarily generational, not in the way that maybe we had originally assumed. For example, chat has now become a universal behavior across generations, not just Gen Z. I think the difference now is how people enter the journey. So younger customers naturally be more comfortable discovering channels or discovering on social media, for example, and then moving into chat, while older customers, for lack of a better term, might start somewhere else. But I think they all end up wanting the same conversational, low effort experience. So it might not be a generational preference, but definitely a behavioral one. If I think to my own dad, who's in his 70s, he's more active in our family WhatsApp group than, than anyone else, right? And has become so used to it that chat commerce will be something that I think be relatively easy for him to actually pick up.
No, 100%. And it's taken away the friction, which makes it a lot easier. So really appreciate the feedback there. Infobip's own research shows 88% of Gen Z and 82% of millennials feel AI has improved the quality of brand interaction, which is higher than most brands expect. Does that match what you're seeing on the ground? And does it change how you think about where AI should be in the customer journey?
From what I've seen, I think customers are far more open to AI than maybe brands had originally expected. And that might be because of our own biases. I think it's important that AI isn't replacing the experience and is hopefully removing friction from it. So I think a key differentiator here is that it only works if it works, right? So when it works well, customers don't even think about it as AI essentially. So they just experience faster responses, better routing, I think more relevant interactions. And if we can use AI in that way, then I think it will be embraced. It isn't necessarily a question of should we use AI, it's where does AI meaningfully enhance the experience. I don't mean from a business sense of efficiency, I mean from enhancing the customer experience.
No, definitely. And how do you see personalization coming into this? And when I say personalization, more than the acknowledgement of who the person is actually having a clear view of what they do.
Well, I think it's the computing power of AI versus the computing power of the mind, and how it can be applied varies distinctly here. And the fact that customer data layers can store heaps of information about me and my interaction across channels. If that can be enhanced by AI, you know what I shopped, you know when last I shopped, you know my preferred categories, you know what I was browsing, you know what I've added to my cart, you know whether I'm a sale shopper or a full price shopper, you know my average price points, you know the brands I like to browse, you know absolutely so much about me, where a manual interaction would never be able to deliver on an automated one that has access to all of this data and can personalize message or conversations to me.
It's that hyper personalization, actually understanding the consumer themselves. So thank you very much for sharing that. Lauren, you've now seen CX from both sides, inside major BPO environments and now from the platform side with Infobip. What surprised you when you moved over? What do brands think is happening in their customer journey versus what customers are actually experiencing?
What surprised me most is the gap between channel availability and customer experience. Many organizations believe They're delivering on omnichannel experience because they're present on multiple channels. They have WhatsApp as an example. They've got email, SMS, voice, and mobile apps. Internally, that feels mature and it feels connected. From a customer's perspective, the experience is often fragmented. What brands often think is happening is that customers are moving seamlessly between channels and receiving a consistent experience. The reality, however, is that many customers are still having to repeat information, restart conversations, or switch between multiple touchpoints to achieve a single outcome. Customers aren't thinking about channels anymore. They're thinking about outcomes. They expect the brands to know who they are, understand why they're engaging, and continue the conversation regardless of where it started. What I see across South African enterprises at Infobip is that teams often optimize channels independently. Marketing manages one channel as an example, customer service manages another channel, inbound calls as an example, digital another, retentions or the sales teams another. Each team may be performing well in isolation, but the overall customer experience and customer journeys are disconnected. What I've seen is organizations that's making the biggest progress today aren't necessarily launching more channels. They're focusing on connecting customer data points, preserving context across those, and designing one continuous customer journey across every interaction.
So South Africa is one of the most mature omnichannel markets in Africa. We're seeing like WhatsApp, SMS, and email growing at the same time, rather than one channel replacing another. What does that tell you about where South Africa brands are right now, and what are the most of them getting still wrong?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that customers are looking for a single winning channel. That's not what we're seeing in South Africa. WhatsApp continues to grow rapidly, yes. However, SMS remains incredibly important still for authentication, as an example, alerts, and critical notifications. Whereas email, on the other hand, also still plays a role for documentation, compliance, and more detailed communication, like your policy documentation or information. What this tells us is that customers are choosing channels based on the moment, the urgency that they need, and the complexity of the inquiry of what they're trying to achieve or resolve. The biggest mistakes brands make, in my opinion, is treating those channels as competition to one another rather than being part of a connected customer journey. A customer may discover an offer through a social advert, continue the conversation on WhatsApp, receive confirmations via SMS, and obtain their documentations through email. To the customer, that's one experience. The opportunity for South African brands as it is, isn't choosing between WhatsApp, SMS, or email. It's orchestrating all of those channels in a way that feels seamless to the customer.
Leland, let's look at something real. You've built CX channel strategies for major remittance platforms, right? Where customers are trusting you with cross-border money transfers over messaging interface for Ackermans, where the purchase decision is much lower stakes but much higher frequency. What is the consistent and good channel design across both of those, and what is completely different amongst them overall?
I think what's consistent is surprisingly simple. So clarity, trust, and immediacy. By being as transparent with our customers as possible. So whether you're sending money across borders for your family to pay their rent or pay school fees or buy groceries or buying kids clothing, customers want to know exactly what's happening. They want to feel confident in the outcome and they want it done relatively quickly. So if you think of the remittance industry that I was in, serving a very underserved populace on the African continent, people are not necessarily sending money across borders for luxury items. They were sending it for basic needs. So being able to trust the product, the emotional weight in that people are literally handing over money is super important. And then retail, I think because you've got this frequency, but we're also a family retail store. So you're buying clothing and apparel, even non-apparel, mostly for your children. There's an element of trust there, and any friction here compounds quite quickly because of who you're actually buying for. So I think it means in retail, the focus on speed and repeatability. In fintech, it's maybe more reassurance and transparency. But I think the underlying design principles of the journey are essentially the same.
And what about the frequency? So you touched on a really good point around that is actually the awareness of knowing what's actually happening rather than you made a request and then, okay, your request is now complete. There's like a stage event between that process. I'm guessing that's the part where you're homing into, right?
Yeah, 100%. I've taken the action. So now I want the action to confirmation. So what happens between this action that I've taken and the end result? I need the transparency. I need the trust that I can know what's happening along the way. I'd like to know that I've sent Kim money so he can pay school fees for his kid back in my home village or something. As an African diaspora, for example, Kim has received it and there's confirmation of that. And not necessarily coming from Kim, coming from the brand, because I've chosen to partner with you and I've trusted you with this money.
When a brand adds something like click to WhatsApp or WhatsApp flows, what separates the brand that creates a generally smoother customer journey from one that just adds another digital touch point?
The difference is really the channel itself, Kim. It's what happens after the customer clicks. Most organizations spend a lot of time optimizing the entry point. They focus on the advert, the campaign, and the call to action. But the customer journey often breaks immediately after the first interaction, after the click. The organizations seeing the best results, in my opinion, have designed the entire end to end customer journey. They've thought about intent, capture, qualification, authentication, the fulfillment portion to that journey, the confirmation portion to the journey, and what happens next during that journey. Today, customers don't judge the quality of the channel based on how they enter it anymore. They judge it based on how they actually achieved the objective that they came into that journey for. What we're also increasingly seeing, just to add, is that messaging platforms are becoming operational infrastructure rather than simply a marketing channel. The most successful brands are enabling customers to discover, engage, transact, and receive ongoing support within one continuous journey or conversation.
Perfect. No, thanks for that. Super apps it's not new. China's doing great with WeChat. They've made an amazing application, which is an app within an app. So it's got so many different environments and it's taken China by storm. We've seen the likes of Meta and WhatsApp trying to build the next generational super app. So in Europe, we're starting to see something interesting, right? Revolut has now 54 products across 50 million users and describes itself as a financial super app. Klarna is expanding from payments into full shopping ecosystems. Bolt combines mobility, food delivery, and car sharing, but none of them are WeChat, but the behaviors are emerging. So, from your experience spanning fintech, luxury automotive, and mass market retail, Leland, do you see this kind of consolidation changing how a brand like Ackermans thinks about customer relationship and where it lives?
Yeah, so I think for us, maybe the important shift is that it's behavioral and not necessarily structural. So customers getting used to have their needs fulfilled in a single platform or single environment. And we look at it even from a South African point of view with our banking apps, with our MNO provider apps. So whether it's financial services, shopping, mobility, so Uber and Uber Eats, as an example, being on the same platform, able to do grocery deliveries, etc. So for Ackermans, I don't think it's do we become a super app, it's where do we actually want to meet the customer and how do we stay relevant in ecosystems that we don't necessarily own. So it might mean integrating into those platforms or doubling down on owning key moments. We belong to, you may not be aware, but we belong to one of the biggest retail groups in the country. And there's 14 brands under our umbrella. So if we had to build a super app, because we do offer financial services and apparel and non-apparel and tech, etc., and insurance and a whole lot of other value-add services, we would probably aim to do one of our own, but no, it's not in the plans at the moment.
Every channel we've discussed today creates a new entry point and a new potential gap where context drops. From your years of working in the industry, what do you see as the channel which orchestrates best behind it and that will enable your customers to build meaningful engagements?
And it might sound weird that any channels might actually create fragmentation, and that's why orchestration is not a nice to have. So the customer should always feel like one customer, no matter where they show up. So I think when you're designing, the most important thing would be a channel agnostic infrastructure. So it's brands that struggle, that rebuild every time a new channel emerges. The ones that scale and probably have done it better than others tend to have a consistent layer of customer data. So I think the data that underpins this is super important in terms of orchestrating and decisioning across channels. So, while you don't know what the next dominant platform or interface will be, you know that the customer will expect continuity across all of them. So I think it's building that layer. So regardless of the interface or the platform, the plugin is seamless for the customer. So I'd focus on that instead of necessarily focusing on the platform. Customers will decide the platform. We need to be future ready with the data that plugs into those platforms.
Lauren, from your experience on both the BPO side and now the platform side, what actually breaks when a brand adds a new channel without the right orchestration behind it? And what does failure look like from the customer's point of view?
So, in my experience, the biggest failure is context loss, Kim. From the customer's perspective, it usually appears as repetition. They explain their issue on one channel, move to another channel, and suddenly have to start right from the beginning when they engage on another channel. What is interesting is that internally, every team may believe that they're performing well. Marketing sees engagement, the operations sees, yes, my resolution rate is looking great. The contact center sees our average handling time is spot on. Yet the customer's experience is fragmented and his journey is fragmented. The challenge is that every additional channel creates another opportunity for context loss. Good orchestration means the customer remains one customer regardless of where they engage. Their history, their intent, and previous interactions travel with them, so it's connected to the customer. The goal isn't to be present everywhere on every single channel in today's life and age. The goal is to be connected everywhere with the customer, Kim.
And it ties in really well. I mean, look, we've come out of an SMS world, which has been transactional. We're now moving to richer channels, which are offering capabilities of conversational AI enrichment, which is really understanding actually what value does each channel provide as to what your strategy should be to be set. So no, that's great. Appreciate that. So let's just close off with one last question then. If you had one piece of practical advice for a CX leader listening today who need to move from one channel strategy but is operating across multiple EMEA markets, where do they start?
I would have to say, especially if it's across multiple markets, is get an idea of the voice of customer in each of those markets, and then also get an understanding of the data held across all of those markets. If you can standardize the data, how that data is digested, the intelligence and modeling behind that data, then it doesn't matter about what platform is dominant in those markets, because they could be different or they could be the same. It could be a WhatsApp, it could be a WeChat, it could be the next big thing. If you've given your customer a seat at the table through voice of customer, you know what the conversational experience should be like. You know how they want to click an ad and enter a chat, transact in chat, complete the process in that same chat. I think you've nailed it. And it'll all be driven by what they tell you through VOC and also the data structures you have in place to support any platform.
How do you see, for instance, channel preference playing into this? Multiple markets. Should they be using one channel, or do you believe actually you've got to look at your local market and differentiate from there?
It has to be tailored to the local market. You're not going to force somebody to choose the channel. They will choose the channel, and you will either be operating that channel or you won't. And you risk missing out if you're not on the preferred channel of those consumers. A lot of strategy thinking needs to go behind it. We know WhatsApp and Meta so dominant platforms at the moment. So if you're not doing something here or planning on doing something here, I think you stand to risk a lot. And I think I can quite confidently say that, given where we find ourselves in 2026, right? But who knows what comes next?
In my experience, they should start with the customer journey first, not the channel. Too many organizations begin by asking which new channel should they launch and start with. The better question is whether they can make and maintain content if a customer switch between those channels. The first step is understanding the current customer journey, identifying where the friction points exist, assessing whether the underlying data and processes can support continuity across those touch points. The second step is building the infrastructure and governance needed to support the journey consistently, Kim. What you'll see is a person builds the journey, but they don't have the infrastructure or the backend in order to support that journey. And finally, in my opinion, they shouldn't assume that every customer in the market behaves the same way. Customers will choose between the channel that they prefer in different markets. Some will prefer USSD, some will prefer SMS, others will prefer WhatsApp as an example. The role of the organization should be to meet the customers where they are while maintaining a consistent experience across all of them. I believe organizations that will improve their customer experience and expertise over the next few years won't necessarily have the most channels. They'll be the brands that make every interaction feel part of the same conversation. I think customers don't compare your channels anymore, they compare the experience. Every new channel that's created, an opportunity to engage exists, but also an opportunity to lose context. I think that's very important. Successful organizations will be those that can connect every interaction into a single and seamless customer journey. Customers don't remember the channel they used. They remember how easy it was for them to achieve their goal.
You're right around the friction points, removing friction within the engagement, and then also building a demographic preference of channel engagement is really core to actually getting it right. Thanks a lot for that, Lauren. The story of new channels in EMEA is not one story. In Europe, RCS is finally moving from promise to scale, and brands are building layered conversational strategies rather than betting on a single channel. In MENA, WhatsApp is already part of the brand core infrastructure. In Africa, the strongest growth is coming from combining WhatsApp, SMS, and email in a way to reflect realities rather than global playbooks. What comes through clearly from both Lelen and Lauren is that the channel itself rarely is where the real challenge is. Some of the challenges is the infrastructure that holds it together. So the customer who starts somewhere unexpected is still known, still in context, and never has to start over. Thank you, Lelen and Lauren, for being great guests. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and we'll see you next month in the break room.